try to hold your position just for one more breath or one heartbeat longer than you usually would. Saying something like, I'm open to other ideas, but I do think this point matters and I want to make sure we've all really considered it. Welcome to The Fearless Foodie, the podcast that gets honest about what it really takes to thrive in food and retail. I'm Amy Wilkinson, coach, speaker and trusted partner to food industry teams with lived experience of the pace, pressure and politics that come with the job. Fearless Foodies cut through the fluff and get straight to what actually helps. And that's exactly what we're here to do. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Fearless Foodie. I want you for a moment to imagine you are standing there in a meeting presenting something that you've been working on for ages and somebody in that meeting challenges you. What happens? What is the physical reaction you feel in that moment? For me, usually my heart rate goes up. My brain goes blank and I can't think of what I want to say. And I either want to tell them where to go and swear at them, or I want to run away and go quiet. This is what we call conflict, and you will have a default response to it. Once you know what your default is, you have a choice. Most of us have a default way of reacting to what we see as a threat, and I mean on a physiological level. Sometimes it helps, but sometimes it really doesn't. And when someone challenges you in a meeting, your brain can't tell the difference a lot of the time between what is just a simple disagreement and a genuine threat. So it reacts accordingly, and it isn't really a communication problem or anything like that. It's a human problem, and it plays out in every food or retail business I have ever worked with. Because we have meetings that have people of different levels of seniority, that makes people's heart go boom, 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 boom for some reason. There's often really commercial risk there. There's food safety risk. There's time pressure. There's people firefighting and protecting themselves. There's us against them tensions that go on, you know, the technical or the sales prevention team and MPD, the fluffy people, all this stuff that's going on. But actually, when it comes down to the brain, what happens when we are challenged is that we go into threat response and we have an automatic reaction in the body. We have a reaction because the brain floods us with certain chemicals that are there to keep us safe. It's biology. It's automatic. It doesn't mean you're failing, but it does mean that there is something there that you need to learn how to manage and to work with. And I'm going to talk to you today about the different default behaviours that a lot of us have. And there's a model, there's always a model, right? And there's a framework called the Thomas-Kilmann model. And it's quite an old one now, but I think it stands the test of time. And it maps 5 different ways people respond in conflict. And actually none of them are wrong, but all of them have a cost when you're over-relying on them. So the first one is competing, and that is when people just go, let's just push through, where people kind of talk over people. We've talked about this enough, let's just move forward. And if you're thinking in colours, if you've done your disc profiling, that often is a red person's response. And the strengths of this are that it is really useful in a crisis. You need someone that is going to be decisive and move the conversation forward. But the risk is that if you are somebody that does this, that it shuts other people down. And that means that sometimes important concerns aren't heard and people don't feel like they are part of the decision-making process. So you're less likely to be able to get them on board. So if you are somebody that finds yourself pushing harder when somebody challenges you, like red rag to a bull, your default is the competing. Then there's the avoiding, there's the avoider. So I'd rather not get into this right now. And this can happen. Like I'm thinking about those times when you're in a meeting and you're like, oh, I really should raise this, but I know so-and-so's in a bad mood. So I'm just going to stay quiet because the room's so tense and I don't want to say it. And sometimes it is the right response to avoid, but it's only a short-term response, because if emotions are running too high, sometimes it is good to say, let's take a pause here. And I'm thinking about, I had Anne Harrod on the podcast, I think it was in the first series of The Fearless Foodie. She was talking about when she got chucked out of a retailer. And that was because she kept on competing. She kept on pushing when she probably should have stopped and avoided. Because when emotions are running high, sometimes the conversation isn't productive. But there is a real risk with avoidance, which is important issues stay buried. And if you are somebody that has ever left a meeting thinking, I should have said something, that's avoiding. And I should say at this point, we all do all of these in different situations. Like, I am somebody that might avoid in a situation where there's lots of people and I don't want to look stupid, but I'm much more likely to be competing if I'm feeling like it's a safer space to do that, like at home, talking about the dishwasher or something like that. The third style is accommodating. So this is that people-pleasing peacekeeper response. And I see this one a lot, particularly in MPD teams, where they are so accommodating to everybody in every other department because they just want to get the timeline sorted, or, you want to move things forward. So they back down when they know that what's being asked of them is unrealistic. And again, it has its strengths in that it preserves the relationship in the short term. But the risk in the longer term is that your voice disappears and actually your credibility starts to disappear over time. Because if you're somebody that's always saying, fine, let's just do it to keep the peace, then you are putting everybody else's needs ahead of your own. And people don't see you as credible, because if you say, like, the timeline's not going to work, and then you find a way to make it work all the time, people then don't believe you. It's kind of that cry wolf thing. So there's also compromising. And people often think, when I say the word compromising, because I do this in the Fearless Relationships training that we do, and people think when you say compromising, that compromise is always a good thing. But actually, compromising is generally a lose-lose situation, or a kind of meet halfway where neither of us are happy situation. So it might be something like you negotiate down on what sprinkles you're going to put, like gold sprinkles. We can't use gold sprinkles, or we're going to use half the amount and it looks a bit crap. We're not happy because we're still using gold sprinkles. The retailer's not happy because it looks a bit crap. So it's not a win-win situation. It's a compromise that you make because you've got to move something forward, because you've got to hit a deadline or, a launch window. But sometimes you're splitting the difference on something that shouldn't be split. And there's a great book called Never Split the Difference, because actually when you're doing that, everybody loses. Let's just pause for a moment, because I want to share something with you that might be quite useful. Something I hear all the time from people in the food industry, whether that's in manufacturing or retail, is that you've got really capable people in the team. They're great at thinking, great at ideas, great at grafting. But when it comes to influencing the room, especially when it's cross-functionally or there's senior stakeholders involved, the message doesn't always land. That's exactly why we created Fearless Influence. It's a practical program, and it's designed specifically for people working in food manufacturing and retail. And it helps them to communicate clearly, challenge, but in a constructive way, and to influence decisions. So if you lead a team and you want them to start stepping up more and step up in meetings, come and take a look at the Fearless Foodies website. And if you're listening thinking, I could really benefit from this, or other people in my team could, send your manager in my direction and I'll do what I can to help. Right, let's get back to the episode. And then there's collaborating, which is often seen as the best way of doing things. And it often is the right way of doing things, because it's trying to get to that win-win. So it's working on something together. So it's actually asking the questions, taking a pause, saying, let's take a moment, understand what everybody's concerns are, and coming to a mutual agreement that works for everyone. But the thing is, sometimes it takes quite a long time to do that. And not every meeting has lots of time, not every critical path has time. And so that's why we don't always collaborate, and why it's quite an underused default when we are put under pressure or feel like we're in a time of conflict. But what it does do is produces the best long-term outcome, because it helps everybody feel like their voice is heard. It helps you get to that win-win situation, and it also builds trust, because you're not pretending that everything's okay. You're not pushing through and saying that it has to be your way or the highway. You are saying your needs matter, my needs matter. Let's find what's going to work for both of us. So that builds trust in relationships. In long-term relationships are generally collaborative. But with all of these, they all have their own strengths and weaknesses. So competing can be good for those moments where you just got to get an answer and you've got to do it now. But you just got to remember that if you are competing and you are just pushing things through, that things might get missed and you might upset people along the way. Avoiding is a short-term strategy, and a lot of the time it means that risks stay and important issues stay buried, but it is the smart choice when emotions are running really, really high. Accommodating, so being that people pleaser, sometimes it does do you good. It helps you with that longer term relationship with your supplier or your retailer. But the risk is your credibility over time is going to not be as great. And remember that compromise isn't always the best thing, because when you're splitting the difference, everybody's unhappy. So collaborating is where we want to get to a lot of the time. So up till this point when I've been talking, you probably know what your default is when you're put under pressure or when you're in a situation of conflict. But what I want you to do is remember that the problem is never really the style. The problem might be using your style in the wrong situation. So I want to talk to you about some practical ways that you can start to adjust your style. Not massive things, but just little things that you can do. So if you're somebody that tends to avoid, rather than going quiet, ask a question. Say, can we just pause for a moment? Because I'm not sure we've just talked about that risk here. If you tend to be somebody that competes, slow yourself down. Notice that you are pushing forward and invite other people's views. So say something like, I'm conscious I'm pushing quite hard on this. What concerns do other people have, or what other thoughts do people have on this? And if you tend to be somebody that is over accommodating, try to hold your position just for one more breath or one heartbeat longer than you usually would before you concede. So saying something like, I'm open to other ideas, but I do think this point matters and I want to make sure we've all really considered it. Because the goal here isn't to change who you are, and I'm all for bringing your whole self to work and not pretending to be something that you're not, but it's to be aware of the way you are and how you show up under pressure, so that you've got a choice to adapt and change that. Because if you always react and have your default way of doing things and things aren't changing for you, then you have a choice. You have a choice on whether to keep doing it the way that you always have, or you've got a choice to try and change the way you are acting in those situations. So, and really, I think a lot of this is around self-awareness. So being aware what your default might be in those situations. So think about the next meeting you go into and you get into that sticky situation. What is your default? And what are you going to do about it? Whether you want to change the way you do things, or whether you're okay with it and you feel like it's the right way to do it in that moment. But it is really important, because I think more and more, particularly in the world of AI and all of that, our relationships at work are what's going to stand us apart from an AI bot. So I just want to mention something that goes a bit deeper into exactly this. The Fearless Foodies Fearless Relationships program, it's built for people like you who work in high pressure environments, in food, in retail, manufacturing, where the work's relentless and the relationships around it are what make it or break it on a day-to-day basis. we go into conflict styles in proper depth. So you understand your own default, how to read others and what their default is, and what to do differently in the conversations that actually matter. So I will put a link in the show notes for that. Right, back to meetings. Here's what I want you to do this week. Next time the meeting gets tense, pause for a second and ask yourself, how am I reacting right now? Am I pushing? Am I avoiding? Am I just trying to keep the peace? Just that moment of awareness is everything. It's the thing that changes the conversation. Thanks for listening to The Fearless Foodie. As always, if this episode was helpful, please share it with someone in your team who needs to hear it. This is a great one to use as your book club or your podcast listen club for a team meeting, to think about what your default styles are and talk to each other about it. Because once you're aware, you can have each other's back. You can notice when the other person is going into competing and you need to help pull them back. You can support each other. So do share it with your team, and do come and let me know on LinkedIn if it's resonated, and get in touch if you want more information on fearless relationships, because this program is making a real difference to teams in the food industry. But in the meantime, be bold, be brave, be fearless, and I will see you next time. That's a wrap on this episode of The Fearless Foodie. If it hit home, subscribe, leave a review and share it with someone who's ready for less fluff and more real talk. And if you're ready to build a bolder, braver, more brilliant team, come find me at fearlessfoodies.co.uk. Until next time, be bold, be brave, be fearless.